if we have two youngsters castling on opposite sides, then most likely we're in for a very exciting game. In today's game we have American Grandmaster Samuel Sevian playing against Uzbek Grandmaster Javokir Sindarov playing at the Grand Swiss 2023 in the Isle of Man. So here white started with the move c4, and after g6 we already have a somewhat surprising move. Here Sevian went for the move e4. d4 is a very natural way to continue, but probably Sevian wanted to avoid a Grunfeld defense after black goes knight to f6 and d5. That's the main idea of the move e4. But after the move e5, we see how black has very good control of the d4 square, so this is a slight drawback of the move e4. And here Sevian continued with the move knight to f3. We already have quite an original position after two moves, which is quite nice. And here the move d4 was an interesting alternative. And here black has to be a bit careful, because taking on d4 might already be quite risky, because after queen takes, even though normally in the opening, developing the queen early is not very common, in this particular position there's pressure on the rook on h8. So here a move like knight to c6 wouldn't work, because white would simply capture the rook on h8. So black already has to be a bit careful in this position. Maybe a move like queen to f6 is necessary, because after knight to f6, white gets bishop to g5, pinning the knight. And although black might continue playing a move like bishop to e7, this is not very natural. After playing g6, go bishop to e7, because after bishop to g7 and e5, white is already winning material because of this pin against the knight. For instance, after knight to c6, white has this very nice move, pawn takes knight, temporarily sacrificing the queen, because after knight takes e4 and pawn takes, white is recovering the material with interest because the queen is attacked, and pawn takes rook, promoting to a queen, is a threat. But in any case, after d4, knight to f6 is more common, counter-attacking the pawn on e4, and this position is quite playable for black. If white takes on e5, then black simply captures on e4, or after knight to f3, pawn takes and e5, now black can go knight to e4 or bishop to e4 first. We get quite an original position, but Sevian didn't want to test Sindarov's theoretical knowledge and went for the move knight to f3, and after bishop to g7, d4, pawn takes and knight takes, knight to f6 and knight to c3, black castled, and here Sevian wanted to play aggressively and went bishop to e3 with the idea to castle long. Bishop to e2 is more common, just planning to castle short, but in these positions black is doing perfectly fine after the move rook to e8. But being ambitious in this position, as we'll see, didn't go well for Sevian. After bishop to e3, here black played this very typical move in this structure, which is c6 planning to go d5. So white has a space advantage on the center with these two pawns, so playing a natural developing move like knight to c6 is not bad, but on the other hand, after f3, white has this very strong center that cannot be challenged. So the move c6 is a very interesting idea, and since black didn't play the move d6, black can try to go d5 at once, so not even wasting time. That's why in these positions black is doing actually quite fine. White still has to castle, so white went queen to d2, d5 was already interesting, but Sindarov went for rook to e8, putting pressure against the pawn e4. White played the move f3, and after d5, pawn takes and pawn takes. Now white finally castled, and black went knight to c6. Taking on c4 is always in the air, and black doesn't want to take and allow white to develop the bishop at once. That's why black decided to develop with knight to c6. And here black has a great position, objectively balanced, but we see that white's king is a bit more open, and it is, in my view, quite easier to play as black. So black can play more natural moves in this position. It is hard to find a clear plan for white, but maybe here white should have gone for something like g4, planning to push pawns, and the move g4 also controls the f5 square, which as we'll see is going to be a great square for black's pieces. But instead Sevian wanted to play maybe more ambitiously, but in this case it was actually quite risky. First he took on c6, and after pawn takes, at the very least this is quite risky for white, because now the rook on b8 will put pressure on the pawn on b2. So this will help black activate the rook on a8, which was quite bad. So here Sevian went bishop to d4, eyeing the knight, but here Sindarov simply ignored this idea and went rook to b8, even sacrificing this pawn a7, which would open lines for black pieces and even waste time for white. So here Sevian took on d5. Just want to mention another alternative to win material for white, which was actually quite bad, but very instructive, is to take on f6, and after queen takes, take on d5. So here we see how, first of all, black's bishop on g7 is quite a monster, and black's attack will simply flow. For example, after taking on d5, and queen takes, black has this very thematic idea of taking on d2, because after king takes and queen takes, black is just given a checkmate. So here white took on d5, and taking on d5 here was perfectly possible because, as we saw, black is not afraid of giving material to gain initiative, but black played another very interesting idea, which is the move c5. Just attacking the bishop but sacrificing the pawn, which white took, but now the c file will also be opened, and additionally now white will develop the queen to a5 with tempo, attacking the bishop, and after bishop to d6, white correctly tries to create some threats, and here actually the move rook to b7 and then simply develop the bishop and bring the other rook to the c file was a great alternative for black. Black is 2 pawns down, but black is simply going to attack white's king. This is even a better position for black, but instead Sindarov continued sacrificing material and went bishop to f5. This bishop is limiting white's king, and here Sevian decided to attack the bishop. It is very hard to blame white now because his position is just very hard to play, but here white had to take the rook, and after rook takes, even though white is ahead a lot of material, we see how pretty much all of black pieces will combine to attack. There is even the idea to bring the knight to the queen side, but in this position white had this idea to go bishop to c4, trying to go bishop to b3 in some lines, and with correct play white should be holding, but honestly in a practical game I would even prefer to play as black. But instead he played another very natural move, which is the move g4, trying to attack this bishop, which is very annoying on this diagonal. But here Sindarov played the very beautiful rook b to c8, simply sacrificing the bishop, and now just readapting his plan. So young players are very concrete players, and now this rook is going to be better placed on the c file. And after pawn takes, his idea was to take on d5, another typical idea in these structures. And here white didn't capture on d5, first took on g6, black captured back, and now white went bishop to h3. White's position is actually already quite desperate, but let's evaluate some alternatives. So here taking on d5, first of all it is not possible with the knight because it is pinned, but after queen takes, we get another sacrifice. We saw a sacrifice on b2, now we get a sacrifice on c3 after rook takes, black is simply winning. If pawn takes, we get a very similar checkmate after queen takes and queen to b2. Or if white decides not to capture the rook, well, white doesn't have a lot of options. If king to d2, black would simply capture the queen in that case. Or after king to b1, black can still capture on d5, because after rook takes and rook to e1, we get a background checkmate after rook to d1 and rook takes e1. So basically now c3 is collapsing and the game is pretty much over, but black still has to be accurate, and after bishop to h3, black captured on c3, sacrificing the rook on c8, but after bishop takes and rook takes, again black has pretty much all of his pieces planning to attack white's king. Here white tried queen to d3, there's the idea to go knight to e3 with a discovered check and an attack on the queen, and taking on c3 in this line would lead to a checkmate after rook takes, king to b1 and queen to b5. If queen to b2, black gets another beautiful sacrifice, rook to c1, allowing to take on b2. For example, after king takes and queen takes b2, we get a checkmate. Or after king to a1, rook to c1, we get a double check, which is actually a checkmate in this case. So white tried queen to d3, and black simply took on a2, and here white tried bishop to c7, trying to go for a trick. After rook takes, go queen to d8, forking the king and the rook, but even in that case actually black still has a very strong attack after queen to b1. But instead there's even a simple alternative, just take on d1, now planning to take on d2, so in this position white resigned. The play could have continued king takes e1, but after queen to a1, black is even winning a full rook. So I hope that you enjoyed this very wild attacking game. If you want to improve as a chess player overall, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that. In any case, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.